So, Satyadasa. I met Satyadasa last year on a retreat. It was my first retreat at Vipassana, and you were sort of the guide for our group kind of thing, weren't you? Mm-hmm. And so we come and talk to Satyadasa once or twice, and I took to him straight away. I don't know why, and you might find out tonight why. Hopefully you will. And when he published this book, I thought it'd be really great for him to come down here, and I ended up getting involved with the books, and he's coming down here. He's come down here to talk about his book. It's I found it really a great revelation for its honesty, for its friendliness, for its sort of the way he felt really challenged by Buddhism, as though it was a sort of fighting thing for some time almost, and then sort of not really wanting to have much to do with it, and then gradually sort of circling around the sort of trying to sort of tame himself or tame Buddhism or something between the two, and out of it came the person who's here today. And I suppose the first thing that we need to talk about is we're going to talk about your hand.
Yes.
Because it's quite you won't miss it if you're talking to Satyadasa. And can you tell us a bit more about it? Maybe read the first couple of pages.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the book is called, hello, by the way. Yeah, nice to be here. Yeah, so the book is called The Sound of One Hand, which, as anybody who's been around Buddhist circles will know, that's a pun on the sound of one hand clapping. But it's a nice title for a book if you've only got one hand as well. So that's it. I'll say a bit more about the meaning of what that means to me as we go on. But yeah, I wanted to write a book which was no, I didn't want to write another book about Buddhism, because there's already quite a lot of books about Buddhism. I didn't feel like I had a great teaching to lay on everyone. So, and I felt inspired to try to share something of my life, in the knowledge that if I can write a memoir, and it can be really personal, a personal story really carries to people, and people relate to it and think about their own lives as well. So that was my goal that I set out. So, but I did, as I set out, I started to sort of write quite abstractly for a while, and then I realized, no, well, I've really got to start with writing about something that's very real to me. So I started to write about my hand. So I'll read the first page or two. Something was missing from the start. Dad bumped into another expectant father in the hospital corridor. "What news?" said the man. "We have a lovely baby boy," Dad replied, "but..." The midwife had introduced me to the world by thrusting my arm in front of Mum's face. "But he's not got a left hand." The man had whiskey and poured them both a glass. Everyone was doing their bit. Dad's father, a farmer, broke from his daily rounds to shout some words down the phone to his son. "Never mind, we'll love him twice as much." 10 years earlier, the drug thalidomide had caused multiple limb deficiencies in thousands of children. So while Mum was sedated, I was examined for ailments more sinister than an absent hand. Every blemish was a harbinger of possible problems ahead. Mum's parents, Grandpa and Nana, were only allowed a quick look. As they sat in the waiting room, a poem came to Grandpa, which he wrote up on a nurse's attendance sheet. His small grey face, but 12 hours here, bears mysteries stranger than the seas, in hieroglyphics more austere and older far than Ramesses. Setting events against a methodological backdrop would surely help. After 9 days, the doctors confirmed it was a congenital birth defect, which is a fancy way of saying they didn't know what caused it. My parents took me home, filled with overwhelming love and anxious sorrow. At the primary school where he was deputy head, Dad found himself repeating, "He's a lovely baby boy," but to a stream of colleagues expecting happy news. Mum was a classroom teacher at the same school. They didn't want the whole thing to be about the hand, but as for me, I fitted right in. Newborn babies can't do much, however many hands they have. We lived in Banstead, Surrey, in a steep row of semi-detached houses with tight little porches and bay windows. Our cortina sat out front on the crazy paving. My awareness grew from the milky, undefined realm of supermarket trolley seat and playpen to include reference to a little hand, which accompanied my journeys around the house. I expected to see it there, not realizing it was different or any less than a person might want, even though my younger sister had popped out with two. My little hand became part of the family, a feature like Dad's chin dimple, which I could poke through his beard, or Mum's long dark hair, which was hard to straighten, or our Labrador's big brown nose. In truth, little hand overstates things a bit. There are small nodes across where the knuckles would have been, but these are only fingers in the archaeological sense, like the worn away remnants of an Iron Age fort. Stump would be more accurate, but who the hell wants a stump?
So,
It's funny, actually, just reading that, I was thinking I've just adopted a little boy and he's 4 years old and he loves my little hand. For him, it's a feature. He's kind of latched onto it, and he was telling a kid at school who's I just got a little hand. It's like really special.
Yeah, absolutely.
My little hand has become momentarily, it's in its glory days at the moment. Anyway, sorry.
No, absolutely. No, are you your grandfather writing that poem?
Yes.
Just as you were being born, and in your book you talk about his strong interest in Eastern religions and culture, but not calling himself anything like a Buddhist or such like. And what sort of influence do you think he had on you, consciously or unconsciously, in your journey?
Wow, yeah, I mean, he maybe I'll come on to him later, because he's somebody who did affect me. Let's say something about him now then. Yeah, my grandfather was somebody who was born in the 1910s, and he got interested in the Dharma, the Buddhism, after the Second World War, at a time when there were this sense of universalism. We had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had sort of universal government was actually mooted as an idea. Sounds pretty dreadful, I think, but there was also a sense of people finally being freed from religion in the more strict sort of Orthodox Christian sense, that was really gone now. And there were these books becoming available from all over the world, Dharma books, Eastern religion in general. And my grandfather just sort of dived right in, and he was, one of the things about where I grew up, we used to go around for tea every Sunday. And there were all these books that probably would be familiar books, Zen books, Alan Watts, Christmas Humphreys, all these Zen teachers. My mother hated it. My mother absolutely, that was her father, and he would inflict Eastern religion on his children without mercy. And he actually, when my mother got married, they had these groups where they used to sort of look at each other down two ends of a tube, and kind of just so you could just see the eye of the other person. This is what we do, communication exercises, and it was a sort of a naked encounter between I and thou. And this was what they used to do. My parents hated it, but that was actually when they were adults. But when they were children, it was even worse. It was just misery. He'd be writing his haikus and his things in the day, and the children weren't allowed to speak. They had to be quiet. It was a very cold house, and he would talk about Western philosophers as well, Heidegger, Hegel, and my mother grew up with a very dim view of Eastern religion. There were no, the Buddha was just another cause of misery to her, unfortunately. So when I got involved in Buddhism, it was a bit of a shock, actually, to her, and not welcome at all.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, from what you said before and what you say in the book is about, because generally people, you want to please your mum.
Yes.
And but clearly she must have thought you were just wasting your time, or?
She was bemused. My mother was very intelligent and very creative, and she knew there was something. She knew there was something in it, but for her, she had tried to escape Eastern religion, and philosophy.
And religion full stop.
And religion full stop. I mean, it was hogwash. I mean, her father was kind of anti-establishment and anti-religion in a certain way. And he gave up being interested in Buddhism, or by the time he was 70, he thought it was all, you know, you shouldn't be a Buddhist if you're a Westerner anyway. That was his, that was the view he came to. He taught meditation, and he had a following. He had his own following, and he wrote a book, which I talk about a little bit. But yeah, she, you know, she was, my grandfather, he was a very controlling sort of fellow. He was obsessive compulsive, I think, at the very least. And I loved him because I went round for tea, and we had these conversations. I mentioned some in the book about, does the breakfast table really exist? We'd be sitting around the breakfast table, and we would seriously discuss these things, whether there was some sort of substrate that was really the table underneath our perception of the table. And my mum would become more and more furious about how abstract and pointless all these discussions were, you know, which is a fair enough point of view, actually. So yes, so he did teach me, he tried to teach me meditation once. He was an optician by trade, and after he'd given me an eye test once, he did suggest a kind of a mindfulness exercise. I wasn't that interested in it. I mainly got interested in it through the books that when he died, I picked up a couple of his books and started, and it was in the ambience of that time.
Was it a struggle to read them, or are they quite challenging to read?
Oh, his books were really impossible to read, but the Alan Watts book was very good. And I mean, the weird thing was, and this is I go into this book, I don't think it's a spoiler. My book's got some good events in it, but it's not like, you know, it's this isn't a spoiler. I was already a mitra when I went back to my grandmother one day for a cup of tea, same house, and my grandfather had been dead 15 years by that point, maybe not, maybe 10 years. And I was living at the London Buddhist Centre. So after I'd completed university, I studied law at Oxford, and I moved into the London Buddhist Centre, which is in Bethnal Green. I lived there for 6 years. And one day I went back to see my grandmother, and we were having tea, and she said, yeah, how is Sangharakshita? I said I was living at the London Buddhist Centre, not expecting much of a reaction, but she said, how is Sangharakshita? And I was, wow, I mean, I hadn't mentioned Sangharakshita, probably hadn't, because it'd just been in the Guardian for sort of none too complimentary article about him. But so it turned out that he had been to their house in 1964 and had met my mother and my grandfather, and had given a talk at their house, at this house where I kind of grew up. I mean, I didn't literally grow up there, but I went there every week. So that was mysterious. My grandmother took me upstairs, and we found a picture of his visit, and we found some notes and things about the opening of the London Buddhist Centre, where I was then living, in my mother's bedroom, in the cupboards around. So that was very strange. Really took me by surprise there. So there was something. I mean, I think the general thing what I was kind of like trying to explore in this book, I don't draw any conclusions like I became a Buddhist because there was this in my family, but to explore these things, and I'm sure we all have these things in our past that, you know, when you dwell upon them, you do give them significance by dwelling on them. And I've certainly learned not to dismiss some of these things that were in my past, and I do feel to a certain degree I inherited some of my grandfather's traits, and not all of the good ones either.
And there came a time in your life when you were very young, you took your hand for granted the way it was, and then there comes a time when suddenly you can't sort of explain it away, or people are making a deal of it in, you know, a negative way. And that's right. I mean, I dropped my son at nursery this morning, and one of the other boys came up and was saying, your dad's got one hand, and they were really interested in it. And but I know that there'll be a point when it becomes a bit problematic, probably. And certainly for me, that was around the age of 7 or 8. When I sort of rudely came into consciousness of being different, or having a physical difference that I couldn't do anything about. And I do remember there was, and I write about this, there was this one day when
I was in the schoolyard. I think I just got to the entrance of the school, and I realized that this was a permanent fact, this hand. It wasn't going to go away. And that, you know, my life, I had a very blessed life. My parents were wonderful. They would help me. Their basic attitude in my life was to say, you're just as good as anyone else. Just get on. Don't worry about it. You know, then we'll help you. We'll switch your brake cables around on your bike so you don't flip over the head thing. We'll work out how to use cutlery differently. I had this bit of cutlery that was a spoon and a fork and a knife that was absolutely rubbish at being a spoon and a fork and a knife. But those things didn't really matter. I mean, you know, with one hand you can do most things. You know, it's not difficult. But of course, it becomes a social problem. And then when I was getting bullied fairly consistently, it was really awful. And it was a problem that wasn't going away. I couldn't see any solution on the horizon to it. I couldn't speak to my parents about it. I think I was, you know, I thought I shouldn't have a problem here. I shouldn't have a problem. This shouldn't be happening. So I kept it all to myself, which was quite difficult for a while. Yeah.
And I guess when you're getting up to being 18, 19, 20, and, you know, going out with chatting people up and
having a go anyway, yeah. Yeah, I used to get into sort of, I think what happened was, I don't know whether you can sort of relate to this in maybe other people can relate to this in their own ways, is I didn't really want to fully admit it into my consciousness that there was this problem that I had. So it would hang around in my mind. And I had a story that I was good and it was fine and it shouldn't be a problem. And I didn't really need to talk to anyone about it. And I didn't need it to be acknowledged really very much. If people gave me praise for doing things really well, despite having one hand, I'll take a bit of praise. I don't mind a bit of praise. I'm up for that. But I would go to parties and I would sort of, no, it never got mentioned. My friends didn't mention it. Other adults, occasionally an adult would burst through and say, that must be quite difficult, what you've got there, you know, how do you do that, you know, but mostly I would just sort of hide it. I would sort of tuck it behind my back a little bit. You can't really hide it, and even like as you start to hide it, it starts to become more obvious.
The hand in the room.
The hand in the room, yeah, and the hand under the carpet. But that was what I did. I just sort of and it's not a bad strategy. I mean, actually, the strategy was quite a good one. Succeed, that was my strategy. Be good at stuff. Academically, I realized I could succeed. Like all of us do, we lean into our strengths when we're young, and that's if things are going well. We kind of lean into what we're good at, and we try to make a go at it, and basically try and attract somebody you're attracted to through being clever or being sporty or whatever it is that you've got going for you. Yeah. But I did feel that there was this problem that was underneath that was kind of shaping my mind to some degree. Do you think that's maybe one of the reasons why you ended up being attracted towards Buddhism as being something sort of slightly different to the norm or anything like that? Or I don't know, you know, I mean, this is one of the things I do. The whole book isn't about the hand in a way, but the question does arise in my life. Well, was that why I became a Buddhist? Well, because I had this visible suffering. Having a disability like this, we all have something in our lives that can be dukkha, is what you call it in Buddhism, isn't it? It's a source of dukkha. It's that which you think if you didn't have it, then everything would be going swimmingly. Could be in your background, could be some thoughts about your family origin, where you come from, how much money you've got, or whatever it is, or the opportunities that you've had. There's something that kind of causes this dukkha, and with a physical disability, it's very obvious and quite concrete in a way. And it's kind of emblematic of a certain level of things not being satisfactory. And I, you know, when occasionally a Buddhist friend, so you know, when I've moved into a Buddhist community, might say, I mean, when I told my life story the first time, I this is a practice we do in Triratna quite a lot. You might sit down and tell everyone your life for an hour and everyone listens. And it's a fascinating thing to do. It's such a great practice if you've never done it before. You might get a chance to do it in a group or on a retreat. It's just a wonderful thing. And this whole book is an extension of that idea. But the first time I sat down to tell my life story, I sort of spent about 20 seconds talking about my hand. I was like, yeah, it was a bit difficult. It was, to learn to tie shoelaces in a different way. Can't play the grand piano. But other than that, it's all right. But I think I had to kind of open up at least to the possibility, and I didn't like it, that had made me feel a bit outside of things. It was certainly one of the drivers, I think, for wanting to meditate. When I learned to meditate when I was about 20, when I was at university, I did a 10-day Vipassana trust retreat, and yeah, I had this feeling of being like, I don't know, maybe every 20-year-old feels it, not really having arrived, being a bit glassed off.
And did you, when you're at university, I presume you must have been reasonably successful and you passed your degree and so
yes.
on, and then you dived into law, and then you dived out of law.
Well, I did a law degree, and I realised pretty quickly I wasn't really interested in being a lawyer at all.
Isn't that because it's very ethical, though, isn't it?
Being a lawyer? Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. No, I was just flabbergasted at the idea that, having been given this, well, I'd been on a retreat and I'd got this sense of mindfulness, and which is a word we use all the time now, but on this retreat, this was 25 years ago. Mindfulness wasn't such a big thing then, but so you were taught to be aware of your body for hours and hours every day. Who's done a Vipassana retreat? Has anybody done one of them? Yes, you're 11 hours sitting there until your knees and your hips are all joined in a medley of pain. And in between that, you get these bursts of great joy and happiness, not just from getting up. And it really teaches you something, that discipline. And it taught me that I didn't have to respond to every little thought, every little thing that goes through my mind, every little insecure doubt, worry. It made me better at chatting up women, to be quite blunt. It did make me better. Because, all the insecure thoughts, you just sort of, yeah, they're just thoughts. They're just like sensations in the body coming and going. That didn't always work, that thought, but sometimes it did. And it gave me a sense of mindfulness, awareness, is this endless, beautiful possibility that was there, that no one had ever taught me. I had this amazing education, really. But no one had mentioned which seems such a glaring omission, like from an education of a person, that we're aware and we can be more aware, and that there's beauty and an endless kind of richness that is possible. And you just get a taste of it on retreat, don't you? But that taste is enough. So that then I thought, why would I want to go and sit in a law office for the next 40 years? That was like the last thing. Of course, I still had to go and do something. So I fell into a sort of state of depression about what to do with my life at that point.
But and when you're in this situation, you had faith in the path in your early days, but then you seem to sort of lose it a little bit, and then regain it, and then lose it and regain it, and falling in and out of love with your leaders, your gurus.
Well, okay, so when I did the Vipassana Trust retreat, I didn't think I was a Buddhist at that point. I didn't have a sense of the path, really. I had a sense of something amazing about this tradition that we call Buddhism. Something really big was being told to me, but there was no Sangha in the Vipassana Trust, or very little that I could see. So I didn't really, I'd practice on my own. I'd get a pile of yellow pages and try and sit on them every morning and do my meditation. But there wasn't one. It was when I came to the London Buddhist Centre about a year later, after various trying to do various jobs here and there just to fill in time while I worked out what I was going to do. I came to the London Buddhist Centre, and then I saw this vision of Sangha. Jyotina was talking about the Sibford retreat, and that was the first retreat I went on, and it was just really, that was different. That was very different. That was then people who were practicing, and everything that they said, and the whole imaginative context that was brought to life on this retreat and at the London Buddhist Centre, that struck a bell with me. And of course, I didn't see it all in one go. It's not like I had the clarity about that I might have now. But there was something deeply, like, I was deeply drawn to that. And I've seen so many people, one of the reasons I wrote this book was to try to describe what I've seen happen to so many people, which is essentially people coming from a culture more or less like mine, give or take, materialist, that has a very, there's a good enough culture. I mean, I had a very fortunate, reasonably well off, great education, lovely parents, and I had a lovely childhood in very many ways. But there was a huge meaning deficit of which I was completely unaware until I was made aware of it. And I, that I've seen so many people. I think that's so important to kind of honor that and mark that regardless of what then goes on to happen, and you've alluded to that, there is this moment that we have when we come into contact with a spiritual teaching or a community, when something really can open up, and I would call it something in the heart or the imagination or the soul, or something gets really touched at another level to the normal discourses that go around in society and education. So yeah. And
so when you pull yourself away from that, and you sort of dive into the world of work, into corporate world, you find you really don't fit in.
Right. Yes. Well, I didn't feel like I fit in, and so I dived into the London Buddhist Centre, and
but then you fell out.
Yeah,
then you fell out of love with Maitreya Bandhu and Yanavacha.
Yeah.
And you write about it.
And I wrote it
very, very, very openly. And I wondered
well, I think
what they thought when they first read the draft. Did you let them have a draft
I did,
of this?
I did, yeah,
Okay.
of course.
And you're still friends?
Yeah,
I know you're
absolutely.
friends. I've seen
absolutely,
you.
Yeah. I guess my experience, and I'm sure it's not just my experience, you get very inspired, you throw yourself into something, and I worked in various Buddhist businesses. I lived in a community. I tried to do what we offer in Triratna is at least there are opportunities to really kind of dwell as much as possible in this Sangha, in this Buddhist life, so you can really let it change you and be profoundly affected. It's not just a retreat that you go on every year or whatever. You're really trying to put your heart and soul into it and kind of make a significant change, which is difficult to say what that is exactly. So I was very inspired, and that's what I did. That's what I did, and I loved it, and I love living in communities. But after a few years I thought I'm going to try to get ordained. But after a few years, I became conflicted, let's just say, or quite unhappy, is another way of saying it. Because I realized that a large part of me didn't want to do this Buddhism Dharma project that I was undertaking.
And would you say that was your ego? You're just fighting against your religion?
No, I wouldn't. I never talk about that in those terms. No. But I suppose I would talk about it more in terms of, my conditioning.
Yeah.
Like I'd grown up with certain expectations about what life would bring, romance, sex, career, a family, a house, and I never explicitly thought, I want romance, sex, career, love, a house. I didn't bring it to my mind in that way. I identified as being quite a sort of a spiritual sort of guy, and it will be enlightened, and everyone's going to really, really love me after a while, and I'll be able to, you know.
But it wasn't happening.
It wasn't happening. That wasn't happening, and instead, I was sort of feeling this sort of the different mythic pulls in my life. The different, like, I did want romance, and the Buddhist path didn't seem to have any relationship to the whole idea of romance and all of that kind of sort of thing. And I was really, really attracted to that, you know, as we often are. So that's a conflict, isn't it? That's a conflict. I was living with Buddhists. I was practicing, going on retreat 3 or 4 times a year. They were all 10, 20 years older than me. Their lives, frankly, looked very boring to me. On one level, they looked very boring and deeply unappealing. And they were really fantastic people. So
which is upsetting.
Yeah, which is, you know, they weren't all fantastic people. Maybe I should. There was a lot of really great people, and there was a sense of I do want something about what they're doing. And yeah, does that mean I have to, you know, get into the whole sandals thing and progress to Buddhist life? And I didn't want that, and I did want more money. And so
that's what you argue with Dharmachari.
I argued about money. He was the money man at the LBC, so we had a bit of a ding dong regularly about money and how much I should have. And I felt dreadfully wounded when he suggested, why don't I go and get a job and earn more money? Because because what happened to me was that I was very sort of quite identified with being in the Buddhist Centre, being on the path to ordination, being a Buddhist, being you know, but like identified with these things, but identified with a particular with the London Buddhist Centre. That was the locus of my spiritual
almost a materialist spiritualist.
Almost a materialist sort of position, but you know, I mean, I it's very difficult not to get into that. It's very difficult not to say, if you're passionate about your spiritual life, you inevitably identify it with certain people, a certain situation, a certain order, a certain thing. That's quite natural. But then it becomes, what happens when you don't, you're conflicted. And then I started to probably, you know, that didn't make me easy to live with for a while. You know, I was conflicted. I both wanted to be in the community, and I wanted something else. And that conflict just built and built. And for a while, all I could do was to sort of tolerate the sort of sense of doubt that gave rise to. Sounds miserable, doesn't it?
Actually, I mean, in the end, you did not only ask for ordination, but you went away on your ordination retreat after you'd already had your retreat with the crazy man up on the roof.
Yes.
In Wales.
Yes.
And maybe we're going to have to wrap up in a few minutes. This time is really flying. But it'd be lovely for you to tell a little bit of a story of your first solitary.
Oh, yes.
You went up on the hill.
Yes. I will.
Do you want to read?
Yes, I will. I mean, I'll just read a little bit. I mean, the context here is, you know, I mean, maybe there's a bit of time after we've had a cup of tea. I can.
Yeah, we're going to stop in about 2 or 3 minutes. Have a cup of tea. Have a book signing, and so on, and then we'll be back up here at about 1:45 to have a bit of Q&A. Okay. So.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit conscious of leaving people in this dreadful state of conflict.
Yeah.
Mind you, I suffered it for so many years. It doesn't end there, don't worry. This is called On Solitary. Bhante, which is what we call Sangharakshita. Bhante, the founder of this order, Bhante said it was vital every now and then to free yourself from the immediate influence of both society and the Buddhist community. We might look like well-adjusted citizens or pleasant Buddhists, but who are we when our community is reduced to one? A single week on solitary was for novices, and I'd done 2 of them. 3 weeks sounded impossibly brave. A few order members had done 6 months or more on solitary, a marathon I wasn't ready to train for. 2 weeks in a cottage far from the madding crowd of Buddhists seemed a respectable stint in the wilds of my own mind. Grandpa lauded the benefits of solitary meditation. Approached positively, he writes in his book, my loneliness takes on the uniquely regenerative quality of aloneness. And where did he do his solitary meditations? The Buddha sent his disciples out alone to face down their terror in the jungle. Grandpa went to his dressing room with Nana on hand for tea and biscuits. I struggled up a hill in mid-Wales to a stone cottage dug in just under the brow, weighed down by my estimation of a fortnight's supply of kidney beans, soy milk, green and black chocolates, and other essentials. Halfway up, my nearest and only neighbour came out of her cottage to explain that there was an armed criminal on the loose. The police say he's tall with red hair, she said in a thick accent. He was last seen over that way, but don't worry, that's over 2 miles away. I gazed across the indicated terrain, and there was nothing there, not even a sheep shed, only my cottage. I lumbered on. The cottage had one good-sized room with an armchair and floor space to roll out a yoga mat, plus a separate shower area and sleeping platform up above. I checked the cupboards for dry food supplies, then sat down in the evening sun with a cup of red bush tea to the prospect of silence and space and nothing. Before bed, I selected defensive weaponry from the kitchen drawer in case of the madman. Where else could he go but here? At 6 a.m., I was startled from sleep by the footsteps on the roof. I sat up thinking what to do. The clip-clopping went on. Only a red-haired madman would walk on the roof. Then it dawned on me that the cottage had an easily approachable front door, and there was no real reason to be on the roof, even if you were mad. I went outside to see the last of a line of sheep crossing the roof on part of the cottage, which was dug deep into the hill. Anyway, I won't go on, but you know, that's the story of how I fall into a great well of doubt on my own in Wales, which is great fun. I do recommend it if you get a chance. Anyway, thank you, Paul.
So yeah, you do get some kind of redemption in the end, don't you? And when you go away on your retreat in Spain, that sounds
I think well, you just cut a long story short, in a sense, this conflict, I leave the ordination process and I became a lawyer actually. So I did actually do what I said I would never do, and ate my words and took things at a more different pace. And I rebuilt my friendships and connections that had become a bit strained and, let's say, broken. I think I realized at a certain point that I didn't have to sort it all out. I didn't have to resolve all these conflicts. It's a subtle point. It wasn't I just like the conflicts are irrelevant. It's just there was something about the way that I was approaching my life in general, which just gradually trained. I have my preceptor Triratna Buddhist Order was, so good. There were so many people who shared with me the sort of the gentle wisdom that comes from years of practice, from matured practice. The men and women who I've met, and in a way, to whom I sort of dedicate this book in a way, which is people who've given me so much who've walked the path ahead of me, and matured. And then there's it's a change in the way of being that allows one to be conflicted, allows one to have all kinds of different aspects.
I suppose it's one of the things that we all sort of think is, that you would imagine ordained members and so on, like sorted, sorted, got it, but actually life is an ongoing process, isn't it? And it doesn't stop there. In fact, it's probably starts there on another level of.
I mean, and the whole big theme that I've mentioned throughout the book is the whole my journey, and then alongside that the journey of the whole order and lots of other order members and other people who go through similar crisis, and the whole order going through a crisis, the whole order maturing. The order, when I was 35, the order was 40 years old, and I say it was going through a midlife crisis. People were starting to think, well, what have I really done with my life? Men and women who'd given 10, 20, 30 years of their lives to a project, and the project wasn't quite shaping up like projects tend not to shape up like you want them to. And there was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and I do sort of explore some of that in the book, because that was part of my experience. It wasn't just me going through this. It was this unfolding thing, a whole community of people trying to do something that was really miraculous in a way, that they were really behind and it really fired up your imagination for some time. And of course, then it can go in all kinds of directions. It can go away, it can end, and sometimes you have to leave a spiritual community. Sometimes you have to change your way of being, and sometimes you get into conflicts and difficulties. So I wanted to sort of put it all down there and keep it, confessional in terms of my life.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I've read it twice now, and I found the second time it was even more exciting and a page turner than the first time. Because I think maybe mostly because of your honesty and the fact that it's really does feel like you put your heart there, you put your heart in, your heart is in your life, traveling along with you. And it comes out beautifully in the book. And it feels like it's just, it's only just beginning reading it as well. It's not like, oh yeah, I've done it all. It's not like it's like a bit of a first chapter. So we'll see.
Well, I'm going to write another book eventually, I've decided, called On the Other Hand.
Exactly.
In 40 years.
Yeah. Anyway,
thank you very much for inviting me. Paul.
And so we're going to have a tea break now, and a bit of a book signing if you wish. And then we'll be back up in about maybe 20 minutes, and then we'll wrap up after a bit of Q&A. So if you've got any questions, think about them during the break. Don't make them too long.